I'm Linda Penner. I chair the Board of State and Community Corrections, and I would like to welcome all of you here today. We are convening today as an appeals panel, and I have two of my fellow board members whom I've invited to sit on this appeals panel with me. Sheriff Taylor from San Benito County and Norma Kumpion from ARC. And to both of you, I appreciate you joining me. This is a very weighty matter, and I know you do not take it lightly, and I appreciate your volunteering for this. Well, we asked you and you said yes. I'm going to call it volunteerism. Natalia is here with us today, and she is going to go through our usual litany of how to participate in this hearing. Natalia, you may take it from here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. We are meeting both in person and virtually, and we will support public participation during this meeting through the Zoom webinar platform. Regarding voting, all agenda items that require a vote will require a roll call vote at the end. Board members in the room, please remember to turn off your microphones when you are not speaking. And when you are, make sure it is on. Speak into the microphone and state your name before making a comment so that those on Zoom can hear you and know who is speaking. Members of the public, we will give the members of the public the opportunity to comment during agenda item 3 prior to deliberation and proposed decision. You will have 2 minutes for your comment. We encourage anyone wishing to make a public comment to raise their hand on Zoom prior to agenda item 3. We will display a 2-minute timer on the screen. After your 2 minutes have ended, I will verbally let you know. Members of the public will not have the ability to unmute yourself during discussion until the chair opens it up for public comment. You must raise your hand on Zoom or send a request through publiccomment@bscc.ca.gov. This is also available on our website. If you've sent in a request through the public comment email box, I will call on the email address or identifier you provided in your email. If you're calling by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand. Dial *6 to unmute yourself. I will call on those who have raised their hands and those who have emailed a request to speak, and I will ask you to unmute yourself. The 2-minute timer will be visible on the screen, so please keep track of your time. When the time is up, please wrap up your thoughts so that we have the opportunity to hear from everyone who wants to make a comment. Also, if your comment aligns with other speakers, please feel free to associate your comment with prior speakers. Thank you for your patience and understanding as we work to ensure all speakers can be heard. We will call the members on Zoom first, then the members here in Sacramento. Public participants in the room, please complete a public comment card by the door and provide it to me during the meeting. You can follow along and view the list of those in the public comment queue by visiting our site www.bscc.ca.gov and clicking on the link in the agenda to join the Zoom meeting. Madam Chair, that concludes my instructions.
Thank you, Natalia. Will you please take the roll?
Chair Penner?
Present.
Mr. Taylor?
Present.
Ms. Kumpion?
Present.
Madam Chair, the panel is here.
Thank you. And now we'll move to the issue at hand today. And for public wishing to comment, we will hear items A and B and then move to public comment. And we will begin with item number 2, the presentation of the appeal. And I think we have Losa Tuatoma that's going to present on that today. I know I had the first name right. The second name is good. I'm going to ask you to present on this agenda item. Loisa?
Yes, thank you so much, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin with the presentation of the appeal, I'd like to provide a brief overview of the appeal process under Regulation Section 1314 to help frame today's hearing. This appeal process allows juvenile facilities, whether county, city and county, or joint, to review how the board standards and regulations have been applied or enforced. Now, appeals may be based on concerns such as alleged misapplication of regulations, capricious enforcement, or substantial differences of opinion on the proper application of regulations or procedures. Now, there are 2 levels of appeal. The first is to the executive director. If the local government entity is not satisfied with that decision, it may request a second level appeal, this hearing before a panel designated by the board chair. That's the stage where we're in today. Now, this hearing is not a formal hearing or a judicial court proceeding, but rather an opportunity to review the facts and circumstances in a structured but accessible way. The panel may consider both oral and written information, and today's hearing is being recorded. After the presentation from Los Angeles County and the response from BSCC, we'll provide an opportunity for public comment, as mentioned previously. The hearing panel will then deliberate and prepare a proposed decision, which will be submitted to the full board at its next regular hearing, which happens tomorrow, April 10th, 2025. At that meeting tomorrow, the board might either adopt the proposed decision, decide the matter on the record with or without taking additional evidence, or order further hearing if needed. Once the board makes a decision, that decision is final and concludes the administrative appeals process. Now, with that context in place, I'm happy to take any questions about the process before moving on to the presentation of the appeal. Thank you.
Welcome today, LA County. I'd invite you now to please introduce yourselves, and secondly, take the podium, begin to present to the body.
Good afternoon. My name is Guillermo Viratos. I'm the Chief Probation Officer of Los Angeles County.
Good afternoon, Esteban Rodriguez. I'm outside counsel for Los Angeles County.
And good afternoon, Tyson Nelson with the county's Chief Executive Office as the Probation Compliance Officer.
You'd like me to take the podium to do the presentation versus here?
I'm absolutely comfortable with you staying there if you like. I don't have,
Okay, I am so comfortable here.
Okay.
Bear with
Well,
me.
well, now I'm going to rethink that.
Oh, no.
No, thank you. Guillermo, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Penner. Just like to make a few comments first, and then for the presentation of the facts, I'll turn it over to Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Nelson. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. We know that we submitted our appeal in writing, but being able to articulate the version of the facts as we see it in person is incredibly important, especially given the magnitude of the consequences. Thank you, Board Member Kumpian and Taylor, for volunteering for this. We know that it's not an easy matter to hear, especially because, again, as I said, the consequences. It's important. I don't want to skip over the fact that our presentation really is on the facts, and it's important that for me that it's taken in the spirit intended. This isn't a challenge against BSCC as an entity. We are a partner to BSCC and appreciate the work that it does. It's important for in the entire state of California. Nor is it an attack on your personnel. Quite the opposite. I was just mentioning before the hearing started that this is one of those few agencies where you just seem to be able to get the best employees from other jurisdictions, and we have high regard and respect for your staff and your inspectors. That's not what this is. Regulations and laws are made by humans and they're applied by humans. And from time to time, it's appropriate to challenge the system for the sake of improvement. That's what we think we have here. That in fact, this isn't Los Angeles County saying we don't want to follow regulations. This isn't Los Angeles County pushing back and saying we don't believe there are areas of improvement. We don't want inspections. That's not it at all. But in a healthy system, there should be, even from control agencies to the agencies are over, an opportunity to push back and say, we think a mistake was made here, or we think a refinement to how the application of the regulations are taking place, or simply it was an unintended error here. And so we hope that's the spirit in which you take this appeal. Again, this is not a county versus state. This isn't an attack on BSCC nor your employees. And irrespective of the outcome, your decision today, again, paramount for me to say publicly and out loud that Los Angeles County is not asleep at the wheel. We, in fact, are committed partners to BSCC and any other entity that can provide technical assistance and partner with us, because we want to provide not just the minimum level of required care for the young people in our custody, But we do believe that we want to do what are best practices and the best thing possible for the young people that we know are with us in the worst moment of their lives, and they are going to be returning to our community as our neighbors. We want to be able to do the right thing to set them on the best path to rejoin us. And then lastly, just a commitment that, again, irrespective of the decision made today, we are going to continue to try to remain as flexible as possible, receive the input that you provide and the technical assistance so that we can make changes to make those system improvements. Thank you.
You. Okay,
He's more comfortable on the podium.
well.
Can you hear me? Okay, there you go. Good afternoon. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Esteban Rodriguez. I'm outside counsel for the County of Los Angeles. Although our appeal that we filed on January 8th raises a number of issues, I want to focus on one for our presentation. And that issue is the BSCC's December 10th, 2024 reinspection finding that Los Padrinos remained out of compliance with staffing requirements set by Section 1321. Now, by the time the reinspection took place, the BSCC had issued a notice of facility unsuitability on October 14th, 2024, declaring that Los Padrinos must be vacated within 60 days. And that notice was based on a finding that Los Padrinos was non-compliant with Section 1321's staffing requirements. As the chief alluded to, the county takes those concerns very seriously, and the county worked hard to address those concerns. And the December reinspection presented the BSCC's inspector with the question of whether Los Padrinos had, by that point in time, come into compliance with Section 1321 staffing requirements. The BSCC inspector concluded that Los Padrinos had not. We respectfully disagree. We believe that the inspector got it wrong. In our view, she applied the wrong standard in finding Los Padrinos staffing non-compliant. At all times in the period under review, staffing levels at Los Padrinos met Section 1321 staffing requirements. But the inspector didn't consider that, in our view. She instead considered much more stringent staffing requirements set by the county's internal staffing assessment. But even if you look at what the staffing assessment provides and the goals that it sets, Los Padrinos, in fact, met the standards set by that plan, as we'll discuss momentarily, for all 11 shifts that the inspector found inadequately staffed. The inspector also noted alleged deficiencies with outdoor recreation, youth getting late to school, and canceled medical appointments. The issue, though, for our presentation is that she didn't actually connect those observations with lack of staffing specifically, as opposed to other causes, which Section 1321 requires. So I'll start by addressing the inspector's staffing conclusions. Just the right clicker. No problem. Thank you. So what we have on the screen now is a copy of the inspector's letter in which she offered her rationale for concluding that Los Padrinos remain out of compliance. All the documents that are going to be on the shown on the screen today are exhibits to our letter submissions. And for reference, they're actually, you can see the exhibit numbers on the bottom of each slide for ease of reference. The conclusion that the inspector reached was largely driven by the finding that you see here at the top right. She noted, we found the 45 shifts reviewed, 5 AM shifts and 6 EM shifts. 24% of shifts overall did not meet the department's required minimum unit staffing requirements. But the problem is that the inspector didn't actually consider probation's required minimum unit staffing requirements for purposes of Section 1321. As Executive Director McGuire observed in his letter denying the county's appeal, the inspector instead considered the county's internal staffing assessment analysis. The executive director defended using the staffing assessment as a tool to determine compliance with Section 1321. In reality, the staffing assessment was more like a blunt instrument. That's because the staffing assessment isn't actually designed to assess compliance with the minimum standards set by Section 1321. As we explained in our written submissions, the county developed the staffing assessment for different purposes, developed it in October 2024 in collaboration with the DOJ's monitor, that's the California Department of DOJ's monitor, as part of the county's stipulated judgment with the Department of Justice. The staffing assessment did not purport, it's never purported to measure the minimum number of staff needed to operate Los Padrinos for purposes of complying with Section 1321. And I want to highlight two reasons why that's the case. First, the staffing assessment is rooted in what you see here. It's rooted on staffing ratios set by the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA. The staffing assessment itself shows this. This is the staffing assessment that the inspector used. PREA regulations impose staffing ratio requirements of 1:8 during waking hours and 1:16 during sleeping hours. That's more stringent than the ratio requirements set by Section 1321. Under Section 1321, staffing ratios need only be 1:10 during waking hours and 1:30 during sleeping hours. The staffing assessment also considered ratios that go above and beyond even these more exacting standards that federal law sets. You can see examples of that on the slide. There are ratios of 1:5 and 1:8 that are not mandated by either PREA or Section 1321. These are ratios that are self-imposed, stricter goals that the county set for itself. Now, the second reason why the staffing assessment was not the proper standard by which to measure compliance with Section 1321 is that it sets staffing goals based not on the actual youth population at any given point in time, but instead on the rated capacity of Los Padrinos, or in other words, the full capacity. And you can see that on the screen. It's a little small, but towards the bottom right hand is a number. It says 309. That's the rated capacity for Los Padrinos. It assumes that all beds are filled at Los Padrinos. But as you know, the number of youth housed at Los Padrinos fluctuates. And with that fluctuation, so does the number of required staff. When the December reinspection took place for the period under review, Los Padrinos' youth population was nowhere near 309. It was approximately 250. 250 youth were housed at Los Padrinos. The inspector acknowledged that in her December letter, noting that the county, quote, had implemented a population reduction plan and had made strides in reducing the number of youth being placed in the facility. Now, I want to be very clear here. The county probation strives at all times to meet the staffing assessment's more exacting goals. Our point here is simply that in measuring the county's compliance with the minimum standards set by Section 1321, the BSCC should have relied on the minimum standard set by Section 1321. It was wrong for the BSCC inspector to instead measure the county's compliance by relying on the county's much more stringent staffing assessment. And we would submit that the panel should consider the consequences of upholding the approach that the inspector took. Counties around the state could be deemed non-compliant under Section 1321, not because they failed to meet any standard enumerated in Section 1321 and enforced by the BSCC, but rather standards set by federal law, or worse, standards set by the counties themselves. This would also do a disservice to youth housed in juvenile facilities if the BSCC were to police the policy instead of standards codified and enumerated in California law. It would disincentivize counties from self-imposing higher standards. None of this would make any sense. And it's why even the BSCC has acknowledged outside of this appeal that its mandate to inspect juvenile facilities is limited to assessing compliance with the minimum standards, and this is important, minimum standards outlined in California Code of Regulations Titles 15 and 24. Simply put, the staffing assessment analysis isn't one of those minimum standards. But even if you were to consider the staffing assessment, staffing never fell below the assessment's goals that it set for any of the 11 shifts that the BSCC deemed non-compliant. The inspector erred in reaching that conclusion, and I want to turn it over to Mr. Nelson to explain his analysis that demonstrates that error by the inspector.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. As I previously stated, my name is Tyson Nelson. I am with the Los Angeles County Chief Executive Office as the Probation Compliance Officer. Prior to that, I was with County Council as one of probation's embedded county councils. I am also a certified United States Department of Justice Prison Rape Elimination Act certified auditor for jails and juvenile facilities, and I have participated in juvenile audits and prison audits. I submitted 2 declarations in this appeal, and I'm here today to discuss my findings referenced in those declarations. And I want to start with the staffing assessment issues Mr. Rodriguez just addressed. To begin, after the December 2024 reinspection of Los Padrinos, the BSCC inspector who performed the inspection orally reported her findings to myself and to other county staff, including Chief Villarosa. The inspector stated that she had audited 15 days worth of shifts from November 19 through December 3rd of 2024. I'll reference that in future comments as the review period. Obviously, how probation staffs, there are 3 shifts per day, every day at Los Padrinos, an overnight early morning shift, 10 p.m., 6 a.m., or the EM shift, as the county references it, the morning shift or the AM shift, which is 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., and the afternoon evening shift or the PM shift, which is the 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Okay, everyone ready for a quiz on that one? The BSCC inspector, therefore, she audited 45 shifts in total over the 15 days. That's the 15 days times 3 shifts per day. The inspector reported that of these 45 shifts reviewed, 11 shifts total did not meet the department's required minimum unit staffing requirements. Again, not 1321, but the department's own internal staffing assessment. Okay, I'm going to change to the next one here. Okay. The document on here is Exhibit A to our appeal for reference, because it is very tiny on the screen. These findings were later documented in the inspector's December 10, 2024 letter shown earlier and displayed here again. That's the exhibit. To evaluate the BSCC inspector's findings, I reviewed at the request of Chief Villarosa the same documents provided to the inspector on staffing and youth population data for this review period. Ultimately, I made 2 determinations that I want to expand on. First, staffing levels never fell below the staffing assessment's goals created by the county for any of the 11 shifts that the BSCC deemed non-compliant. Second, all 45 shifts for the review period complied with the staffing ratio requirements in Section 1321 H, obviously as previously referenced, 1 to 10, 1 to 30. I'll start with my findings on the staffing assessment. And I'm gonna change slides again here. Okay. The county created staffing assessment created a goal to have a working staff total of at least 40 staff during the overnight EM shift and 60 during the morning AM and 60 during the afternoon, evening PM shifts. Shorthand, it's called, we've referenced it as the 40-60-60. These totals were generated by applying the staffing ratios under the federal regulation for PREA. The federal PREA staff to youth ratio, as you know, requires staffing of 1 to 8 during waking hours and 1 to 16 during sleeping hours. So comparing that to the county shifts, the AM and PM shifts would be the waking hours, 1 to 8. The EM overnight shift would be the 1 to 16. These obviously are more stringent than state law. When I reviewed the staffing and youth population data in the documents made available to the inspector for review, I determined that all 45 shifts complied with the 40-60-60 staff goals set by the staffing assessment, which again, that is higher than requirements of 1321. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide here, and this is a lot of tiny information, but the exhibit is Exhibit D1 to our appeal for those that do not have a magnifying glass with them. Okay, so here is a chart showing staffing and youth population totals across the review period on a per shift basis. The chart was submitted to the BSCC as Exhibit D1 to my declaration in support of the county's January 9 appeal. So let's look at column E. Ugh, okay, it's the first arrow there. At the top on the left side, the first arrow is column E. Displays the total on-duty staff at Los Padrinos for the AM, PM. Oh, no, you're good. I don't want to look at myself. Okay. Okay, cool. Let me refine my place here, sorry. Shocked by my own image on the screen here. So column E displays the total on-duty staff at Los Padrinos for the AM, PM, and EM shifts for each day that the BSCC inspector audited. Column G, which is the column obviously with the next arrow, displays the 40-60-60 staff goals for the EM, AM, and PM shifts respectively. The 11 shifts that the BSCC inspector deemed deficient are shown in the red text throughout. So for reference, 11-19, the EM shift she found out of compliance. As you can see by comparing the numbers in column E and column G, all shifts in the review period met the 40-60-60 staff goals, and again, the department's more stringent staffing assessment. For example, although the BSCC inspector found that the November 19, 2024 EM/overnight shift did not meet the 40 goal in the county staffing assessment, you can see here that it did. As you can see in column E, the total of on-duty staff at Los Padrinos that were involved with supervision of youth was 48, which exceeds the 40 staff goal for the shift shown in column G. The same is true for the other 5 EM shifts and all 5 AM shifts the BSCC deemed deficient. You can see in column E that all exceeded the 40 staff or 60 staff goals respectively. To better determine how the BSCC inspector arrived at a different conclusion when we actually went in and looked at the numbers, I spoke with the BSCC auditor. I also spoke with a probation supervisor that works with the BSCC auditor when she's on site. I learned that the inspector calculates the staffing numbers by beginning with the total number of staff on shift for the unit, then removing various staff whom I refer to as, just colloquially, as the small group staff. The small group staff includes staff with youth at the hospital, so obviously off-site from Los Padrinos, and staff assigned to movement and control. So they're on site, but they're in the movement and control area, helping kind of run the totality of operations at the facility, and staff supervising youth on a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 basis. So again, small group staff, when I reference that, is staff at the hospital, staff in movement control, and staff on doing a 1-on-1 or 1-on-2 level supervision, which would be inside the living units. Okay, so I've changed to the next slide here. This again, is the exhibit shown is still D1, same exhibit. So to illustrate how this method was applied by the BSCC inspector in her audit, this slide shows a magnified version of part of the exhibit D1. We're showing you 1119 as an example. This portion highlights the AM, PM, and EM shifts for 1119. The shift in red text represents one of the 11 shifts that the BSCC inspector found deficient. So let's look to the shift the BSCC inspector found non-compliant. During the shift on 1119, the EM shift, the staffing assessments benchmark again was 40. Although 48 staff were on duty, 18 were small group staff. See column H. Leaving 30 with the general population. See column I. This yielded a fail from the BSCC inspector. The county does disagree with that application and this finding, because the county argues it's error for the inspector to exclude small group staff in considering whether the staffing assessment of 60-40-40 goals were met. In fact, I need to change the next slide. Okay. In fact, the staffing assessment itself, that document that created the 60-60-40, the same one that's been applied here, tells us it was wrong to discount small group staff in this way. Because the staffing assessment explicitly includes small group staff in that 40-60-60 number. As you can see here, staff with youth at the hospital or MOU medical staff. 2, staff assigned to movement and control or MC/M staff. And 3, staff supervising youth 1-on-1, 1-to-2 is labeled as levels 1-to-1/1-to-2 supervision staff. Are included to generate, so all of that is included to generate the 40-60-60 in the county's internal staffing assessment. Because they were included to create the 60-60-40, they should not be excluded when doing an assessment to determine whether you've met the 60-40-40. So I feel like I'm teaching you algebra, so I'm sorry. Next, we'll move to geometry here. So I've moved now to slide 14. So turning to the second finding I mentioned earlier, applying section 1321 at the request of Chief Villarosa, I found that Los Padrinos staffing levels at all times met, and in most cases greatly exceeded the ratios California law requires. Exhibit D1, as previously discussed, shows staffing and youth population totals across the review period on a per shift basis. Again, column E shows the total on-duty staff for each shift across the review period. Column F, these are the 2 columns with the arrows, shows the total on-duty staff required under section 1321 staffing ratio requirements for each shift given the youth population. So to kind of digest that, you'll see there that E is how many we have, F is how many is actually required under staffing ratio of 1321. Since the youth population varies across shifts, the number of on-duty staff required to satisfy the 1-to-10 for the AM PM and the 1-to-30 for the EM shift obviously varies. As you can see by comparing the numbers in column E and column F, every shift in the review period, including those the BSCC identified as deficient, shown here in the red text, meet section 1321 staffing requirement ratios. So again, when you actually look at what state law requires and what the BSCC is required to audit, you look at the numbers, you break the numbers down, it's compliant with 1321. All right, so I've moved to now to slide 15. To illustrate, we're now going to look at November 28, 2024, not 2014, sorry, the EM shift. There were 245 youth in detention. You can see that in column D. Sorry, 237 youth in detention on the AM shift and the PM shift. One additional youth for the overnight shift. You'll see there in column D. Los Padrinos had 48 staff on duty for that shift. That is C column E. Obviously is over 5 times more when you compare it to 1321 requirements. Still, the inspector found the shift to be non-compliant. So this is the end of my current analysis. So if there's not any questions that you all have, I can turn it back to Mr. Rodriguez, but I know this was a lot.
I'm not ready for questions now. Anybody from the board?
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
So I'll start our second and last part of the presentation here. The findings that Mr. Nelson just walked through are undisputed. In denying the county's appeal, the executive director never addressed them. Instead, those findings were dismissed, and the executive director stated that, quote, the BSCC has never asserted that Los Padrinos was out of compliance with section 1321 based on the facility not meeting the required staffing ratios. We know that's not the case, and we know that's not the case from the December 2024 letter from the inspector that I showed you earlier. In her letter, the inspector based her findings first and foremost on probation allegedly not meeting the department's required minimum unit staffing requirements. And in coming to that conclusion, the inspector relied on the county's staffing assessment, which, as we've at length by now shown, is based entirely on ratios. So unable to refute the county's evidence on staffing ratios, the executive director's focus shift to claim deficiencies with programs and services at Los Padrinos. In the executive director's letter denying the county's appeal, he stated that after reviewing this other evidence, BSCC further determined that programs, recreation, and exercise were not consistently occurring, that youth continued to be held in room confinement without documentation and held in their locked rooms for excessive periods of time, that youth continued to be late to school, and that youth were not getting to medically necessary appointments due to lack of staffing. Now, I'll agree, the county will agree on one thing in this quote. To support a finding of noncompliance under section 1321A or B, deficiencies in programming and required services must be, as the director put it, due to lack of staffing. And section 1321 makes that very clear. Where we disagree is that this causal link between lack of staffing and alleged deficiencies with the programming and services was established in the reinspection. And you don't have to take my word for that. Take the BSCC inspector's word for that. As the evidence that we submitted shows, the BSCC inspector herself told county officials at the December 9th, 2024 meeting in which she reported her findings that she did not have enough time to assess and did not assess whether any of the alleged programming shortcomings that the BSCC identified were connected to the BSCC staffing ratio related findings. I'm quoting from a declaration that you'll find in our written submissions. That shortcoming that the BSCC inspector described is evident from her letter from December. For example, with respect to medical appointments, the inspector's letter doesn't explain, for instance, how many appointments were canceled or how many of those cancellations, if any, were actually connected to low staffing. Turning to programs, recreation, and exercise logs, the inspector concluded that the findings of noncompliance with staffing are also linked to the inability of the facility to provide programs, recreation, and exercise in compliance with the minimum standards due to the lack of staff. But the inspector referenced only 2 instances over a 2-week period in which activity logs purportedly documented lack of staff as the cause for cancellation of outdoor exercise. She didn't cite examples of those. So we, again, by we I mean Mr. Nelson, had to review activity logs corresponding to 11 shifts that the BSCC deemed non-compliant. Mr. Nelson found 1, not 2, instances in the logs where staffing issues were noted as a cause for cancellation. Now, let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that 1 instance, or even 2 instances, if there were 2, were actually attributable to a lack of staff. We would submit that 1 instance over a 15-day period that was being reviewed cannot support a violation under either section 1321A or B, let alone resort to the drastic measure of shutting down Los Padrinos. Finally, the inspector stated in her December letter that the finding of noncompliance with staffing was also based on the inability of facility staff to get youth to school on time due to the lack of staff available for supervision within the classroom. Again, the inspector offered no details to substantiate that very broad statement as to how often youth were late, by how much, what staffing levels were during those 2 shifts, anything of the sort to connect those incidents that she describes here generically to low staffing. So once again, the county had to do the math, and it undertook its own review of activity logs for this issue. And the county's findings, which Mr. Nelson will again present, refute the BSCC's determinations as to school tardiness.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. So to evaluate the BSCC findings as to programming and services, I reviewed the same documents provided to the inspector on outdoor recreation, programming, and school movements for, again, the review period, the 15-day review period. I found that 10 out of the 11 shifts that the BSCC inspector deemed non-compliant or out of compliance with minimum staffing numbers occurred when there were no school programming provided. So specifically, we can break that down. 6 of the shifts deemed non-compliant were overnight shifts. Obviously, programming in schools do not occur in the middle of the night. And 4 of the AM shifts were deemed non-compliant, fell on the weekend, and therefore no school programming was provided. There was only 1 shift the BSCC inspector deemed out of compliance with the minimum staffing numbers that took place during a time when school programming was provided. That's the December 2nd, 2024 AM shift, which fell on a Monday. Based on my review of the materials provided to the inspector, there were just 2 units out of 21 units on the December 2nd, 2024 AM shift, where it was noted that school started late. So for context, in each of these 2 units, school actually started late by 10 minutes or less. I'm going to now move to slide 20, actually. Let's go. Okay, so, and the documentation merely notes as a cause for the tardiness. So if you look at probation and Los Angeles County Office of Education, their documentation that the tardiness was a nurse in the unit. There's no connection between deficient staffing. Obviously, nurses doing meds, nurses responding to medical issues, that is not related to lack of probation staffing. This makes sense because when you actually look at that shift, staffing numbers and youth numbers, there were abundant staffing for that shift. And this is where we're breaking down on the screen the 12-2 staffing documentation. As you can see here, this again is Exhibit D1 that I walked through earlier. There were 72 total on-staff duty for this December 2nd, 2024 AM shift. That's column E. Far exceeding both the 26 staff ratio that would be required based on 1321's ratio, column F, and the staffing assessment goal of 60 staff for that shift. I'll turn it back to Mr. Rodriguez unless there's any questions on that. No, okay.
I'll just stay seated for this last part. Just want to say thank you for the opportunity to present again. We know you're taking this matter very seriously and appreciate your deliberation on it that's forthcoming, and we welcome any questions that you might have for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Aaron McGuire, I'm the Executive Director of the BSCC, and I did issue the denial of the first level appeal to the County of Los Angeles. I'm going to exercise my prerogative to defend that decision myself. So, you know, the first thing I would just want to start off with, I think, is yeah, we definitely have a fundamental disagreement about how we interpret Section 1321. So I want to start off by just making sure we're on the same page of what 1321 provides. 1321 is the regulation that that covers staffing, and it starts with each juvenile facility shall, and subdivision A is have an adequate number of personnel sufficient to carry out the overall facility operation and its programming to provide for safety and security of youth and staff and meet established standards and regulations. Subdivision B, ensure that no required services shall be denied because of insufficient numbers of staff on duty, absent exigent circumstances. Have a sufficient number of supervisory level staff to ensure adequate supervision of all staff members. And I'm going to skip to down to subdivision G, which is facilities shall have sufficient administrative, clerical, recreational, medical, dental, mental health, building maintenance, transportation, control room, facility security, and other support staff for the efficient management of the facility, and to ensure that youth supervision staff shall not be diverted from supervising youth. And then after that, we get to H, which talks about the ratios, which Mr. Nelson talked about. And he is correct. We have never asserted that the County of Los Angeles fell below those ratios that are required in Section 1321. That was not the basis for our finding of noncompliance. And I would maintain still that based on the assessments by our inspector, the correct conclusion was that Los Angeles County does not have an adequate number of personnel sufficient to carry out the overall facility operation and its programming and to provide for the safety and the security of the youth. And that services were being denied because of insufficient staff. And the way that we've attempted to do that calculation is in a couple of different parts. One is evaluating the staffing plan that the county themselves provided to us to look at whether or not they have met their own established minimum level of staffing for the various units and activities that they needed to do. And based on our inspector's assessment, she concluded, and I believe correctly, that they missed a percentage of those shifts over the period of time in which this reinspection occurred between December 5th and 6th. So, so what we are looking at is a totality of the circumstances, a bigger picture than just whether or not they were hitting these ratios, which are referenced in subdivision H. It is there enough adequate staffing for the service to be provided? And what we're looking at is a combination of things. One is their own self-assessment shows that they were falling below those minimums on several several days. And again, that there was a significant denial of services that was related to that lack of staffing over that period of time that is set forth in the original inspection report and in the denial letter itself. And we also do have a fundamental disagreement about how LA is calculating the staffing that Mr. Nelson was referring to. We do believe that it was correct to back out a number of staff to assess the overall staffing. When we are referring to those one-on-one level staffing, those people are not available to be elsewhere in the facility, and those numbers can be correctly backed out to show that other unit staff are being pulled for other services, and that they are not maintaining the level of staffing over those periods of time based on the assessment by our inspector. So, I think I want to pause there and see if there are any special questions. And certainly we can invite Ms. Southwell up here to discuss the methodology that she was using to back up those staff. But I would urge this panel that, again, based on the assessments that we set forth in our written information and the documents that we provided, we believe we correctly assessed that Los Angeles County does not, and frankly, currently still does not have, going back, and let me back up just to remind the panel as well. Initially, this goes back to August of 2024, where we were observing these things. This continued through the denial of the corrective action plan, which did not provide sufficient information related to them being able to correct these items within a sufficient period of time. And because they were unsuitable, they requested this very short window of look that we did for that period in December. And even in that very short period of look back, we still concluded that there were not sufficient staff on site at the time and did not provide for the safety and security of the youth, and did not provide for the programs and other things that are required in services. And again, evidence with documentation indicating that youth were not going to school on time due to lack of staffing, and information that youth were not getting to medical appointments due to lack of staffing. So that is the evidence our inspector reviewed, and which contributed to the overall conclusion that, again, they were out of compliance with Section 1321.
Ms.
Well, yes.
I was just going to ask if we would have the opportunity to respond, but we
Oh, no,
could
please
certainly wait
respond,
until
and then-
after.
No, you go ahead and then I'll go next. I'm defer to you right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Just quickly, I want to address a few points, and Mr. Guire mentioned that they use as a basis the staffing assessment to look to see if the county is meeting its own minimum standards. As we explained, the staffing assessment, Section 1321, the question under Section 1321 is whether adequate staffing levels for purposes of Section 1321 compliance are being met. Yes, the staffing assessment creates goals, but the goals that it creates, as we've discussed at length by now, are sets as a floor, something much higher than what Section 1321 requires based on federal regulations and the county's own more stringent goals that it set for itself. The other point I want to respond to is the findings that Mr. Nelson walked through at length, I would say are still undisputed. Didn't hear any evidence other than statements from the executive director disputing those findings. On the issue of excluding small group staff, again, the staffing assessment contemplates that. It's one thing to apply a staffing assessment for purposes that it's not intended to, for purposes for which it is not intended, which is compliance with section 1321. It's another to then apply it, misapply it in that way, and then choose to ignore that the plan itself in creating the goals contemplates excluding minimum staff. So you either should take it as it comes or not take it at all. And finally, for purposes of section 1321, I believe Mr. McGuire also mentioned that, yes, section, the ratios set by section 1321 are in a different sub-provision of that statute. It's not A or B. I believe it's F. And that's fine, but to not consider the ratios enumerated by state law and instead consider a staffing assessment for a purpose which is not intended, and then to then misapply it by excluding small group staff, I would submit is a mistake. And if you're going to admit that the facility met the ratios required by section 1321 that are enumerated in that statute, it stands to reason that you would need even stronger indicia that any perceived programming deficiencies were caused by lack of staff specifically. Also did not hear anything from the executive director that made that connection that the inspector herself conceded she did not have time to make. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Chief Rosa.
We do truly appreciate the amount of time that you're allowing us. We know it's more than usual, but your decision affects a quarter of the residents of California, so we do appreciate the time. You've been subjected to a lot of math. Lucky for all of us, that's, I was about to overshare, tell you what I got in college. So if you would just consider the following. We're functioning in an imperfect world in which I believe your employees are trying to do the right thing. But they're confronted with a bad statute. They're attempting to utilize come to a qualitative assessment with a quantitative standard. Everybody understands what a ratio is, and I think now it's been conceded and also in writing that we met the ratios. That what's at hand is this qualitative assessment determining whether other requirements were not met because of staffing. Our position is that there was insufficient information provided to you to link those, because we certainly can't use observations that have been made out of that assessment period. And secondly, please consider that that is an impossible standard to ask your inspectors over the course of time and over different people to have any internal validity. That means that you could get a report before you someday in which a sheriff's or a probation department has 1,000 times higher the required ratio, but the assessment is that some other section programming isn't taking place because of staffing. That would seem ridiculous to you. Clearly, there are other reasons why organizations fail. It could be quality of training. It could be management. It could be an infinite number of reasons. To tie them back to simply staffing after you've said the minimum requirements are there is unreasonable and really is a bad regulation that maybe has not been challenged before, because what is occurring in Los Angeles County is so challenging in and of itself. So I ask you to please consider that you may be asking your inspector to do something that really is wholly inappropriate. They don't have the right tool to perform. Thank you.
Would you like to respond, Mr.
I-
McGuire?
I'll just add a couple things.
Okay,
On the legal interpretation of the statute, which is again, the two salient sections are A and B, which is have an adequate number of personnel to run the facility safely and to ensure that services shall not be denied. And that is all inclusive. It is when you get down to the subdivision, which refers to and it's all inclusive. You have to hit everything, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H, which refers to the ratios. So, and again, that is the minimum bar that they also have to hit are those ratios. And again, in terms of the overall assessment of the facility, we don't, and I'll sort of add this as an aside, they refer to the 60-60-40 as a goal, an aspirational goal. We also fundamentally disagree with that. We think that that level is at best a critical level of staffing, and they need additional staffing. I would also just add, again, that recognizing that LA has tried to bolster their staffing through the use of deployed staff. And it's good that there are more people at that facility. It's a large facility. But I disagree with the idea that untrained, not in the correct location, and not providing the services reflects adequate staffing. And if you have people not in the right locations, that does not represent adequate staffing.
I apologize, but that's an overreach. Every single one of the deployed peace officers under 830.5 have received the requisite BSCC mandated training to work in that facility. To make a comment on sort of the internal movement of staff and say that they're untrained, I think is an overreach.
okay, I need some clarity. I heard you say that there is a fundamental issue in that there's a disagreement between the BSCC and Los Angeles about 1321 and how they interpret it. Is that accurate?
Yes, they think that as long as, and I'm going to paraphrase, that much greater weight should be placed on the ratios than any other factor.
Thank you. And you're willing to state on the record, you did state on the record that we have never asserted that LA's fallen below the ratios.
Correct.
And so I'm now going to use Linda language from my past. Is it an issue of deploying staff appropriately after you've met the ratios?
That's certainly a component of it. But
Okay.
again, we have to look at whether or not there is a adequate number of staff provide for the safety and security of the facility and to ensure that the programs are being delivered as well. And programs and services are being delivered.
And used as, and forgive me for the use of this term, evidence of compliance or use of staff in the building, we look at those ancillary services in terms of medical, getting to medical appointments, getting to school, getting many other issues addressed. We utilize those other factions as deciding if staffing is appropriately being used, staff is appropriately being used in the building?
So we're evaluating different things, including the other regulations. So if we are seeing other regulations within Title 15, which are falling below that standard,
Thank you for saying it better
and
than I
that
did, yes.
and that we can attribute to a lack of staffing And again, there's been several different matters involving Los Padrinos where they've been out of compliance with other regulations at various times. And we would be looking at those other regulations to see if they were being complied with and whether we would also attribute the lack of compliance to staffing. And so we've been looking at different regulations at different times, including room confinement and the use of force and the use of restraint devices. Some of the larger concerns involving the safety and well-being of youth. That's also included the getting to medical appointments on time for out of service. And then, of course, at the education component of being able to go to class on time.
Thank you. I apologize for leaving out use of force and room confinement. Those are very big considerations. And I am now going to ask you narrowly, hold please, narrowly to respond to my question to council about his assertion that you disagree on the application of our, that we utilize on 1321.
I'll let my colleagues respond, but just two very brief, very specifically to your question. Please consider that the assertions made, there's very little evidence presented. In other words, there are these leaps that are made in writing barely, and certainly today during the presentation, that those other required activities did not take place. First of all, we've presented some evidence that they did take place. And secondly, that they did not take place, not because one staff member asserted there was insufficient staff in the whole facility, but because in fact, a lack of staff caused that. That's absent. Secondly, and I'll stop here, over to Mr. Nelson, I implore you to consider the fact that not being able to come up with a number for the minimum number of staff is a flawed regulation. If you were to hear clearly what Mr. McGuire is saying is that I cannot tell you what the right number of staff is to run that facility. I cannot tell you on any given shift what the right number of staff is, because Mr. Nelson may be more efficient than I, and in that case, we just need to meet the minimum. But because I'm a little slower, I may need to schedule 5 more people. That is an impossible standard. At some point, if you say there's a standard for the requisite number of people, you have to tell me what the number is, or you have to very clearly tie that it is a lack of some imaginary number that caused those other things. In this case, the record is clearly lacking tying those two together. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. So I wanted to also address your question about the fundamental disagreement. If you look at A, B, and they also reference G and other paperwork, it references falling short in other provisions, right? So you need to link it. Staffing, medical appointments. Okay, so let's look at the medical appointment regulation. That's 1411. The BSCC has never found the county out of compliance with that. I should say never. I should say in the last 3 years, they have not found them out of compliance with that. So then to say, but you're out of compliance for staffing based on that regulation, but you're not actually out of compliance on that regulation. It's like you're not only talking out of both sides of your mouth, you're talking out of every hole in your body. If you also look at education and school movement, they say you don't have enough staff to do school movement. They did not fail, they being the BSCC, have not failed the education standard. So probation is meeting the minimum threshold to pass inspection under school and education movement. Yet, for some reason, they're finding, but you're not meeting staffing based on that, but you're meeting the regulation. That's the fallacy, I think, of why we fundamentally disagree, because, you know, I'm not that smart, but I have common sense, and that's not common sense. To be able to say, you're failing this one regulation, not because you're not meeting the ratios, but because you're not meeting other regulations based on staffing, but you're actually meeting that regulation. Makes no sense. And then if you look at Programming, Mr. McGuire referenced what you all know about for tomorrow. Tomorrow, the BSCC is recommending that programming be found compliant. Again, yet they continue to link staffing under 1321 is insufficient because you're failing in programming, but pass them in programming. That's confusing. And so Mr. McGuire then referenced room confinement, use of force, use of mechanical restraints. If you look at the write-up on room confinement, it's not lack of staffing. It's inappropriate paperwork and inappropriate application of the standard. Not you don't have enough staff to properly meet room confinement. It's you're not doing the paperwork appropriately, not you don't have enough staff. So that doesn't match. The BSC has never matched those two. So what that means is probation or the county is failing under the room confinement regulation because you're not doing the paperwork appropriately, not you don't have enough staff. They've never tied those two together. Now, on the use of mechanical restraints, same argument here. They don't say you don't have enough staff to be able to use mechanical restraints or to meet the use of mechanical restraints. What the BSCC explains is you aren't doing the paperwork appropriately. Not you don't have enough staff to do the paperwork. You have enough staff to be able to enact the regulation and move the youth around the facility and use mechanical restraints. You're not documenting that appropriately. Again, that's not a staffing 1321 failure. That's a regulation failure for mechanical restraints. And so the county's not sitting before you saying, we're perfect, pass us, put a rubber bow on everything and, you know, shoot off sparklers or whatever. But what the county is saying is we aren't failing or we aren't not meeting regulation because of staffing. There are other issues underlying that of why room confinement is not done appropriately, why the use of mechanical restraints is not done appropriately. And then I also want to address use of force. So what is conveniently left out is your inspector is very thorough and she reviews video, she reviews footage, she talks to youth, she talks to staff. When you, in conversations with the county, the inspector has explained that when she watches use of force video, 10, 15, 20 staff will respond. And so it's not a staffing issue when it comes to use of force. The use of force failure is the department is not meeting constant supervision afterwards. But if you then said in the same moment that you had 20 staff in the room, but you weren't doing direct supervision as required under the code, let's say after OC spray where you're required to do direct supervision until they're decontaminated, its staff is not being appropriately used. That is not a 1321. That's you need to fix that under use of force. And so I think that's the fundamental disagreement is it's 1321 failure plus something else. And the BSCC, as Mr. McGuire was explaining, well, it's 1321 plus they're not getting them to school, but they've passed the school regulation. It's 1321 plus they're not getting the programming, but passed them in programming. It's 1321 plus medical appointments, but they've passed 1411, which is access to healthcare, which would be where you would find that the youth aren't getting what they need under 1411. And then you can have the conversation of, well, does that link to staffing? It can't link to staffing if you meet the underlying regulation. And that's the fundamental disagreement where I think every county should disagree with Mr. McGuire's interpretation because it doesn't flow with common sense.
Well,
Could I?
I'm not going to comment on your comment because lawyers disagree all day long.
Could I-
And for you to imply that, you know, we lack common sense or Mr. McGuire lacks common sense troubles me.
No, I don't say that he lacks common sense. I say the
That's okay.
application.
What would you like to say?
I'll keep this quick, and I know we're going for a while here. I just want to go back to, because I know we're talking about a lot of different issues. There was mention of use of force and whatnot. The programming issues under 1321A and B that Mr. McGuire, and that issue for purposes of this appeal, the December reinspection, school tardiness, medical appointments, outdoor recreation. We know that Mr. McGuire mentioned that as long as we can attribute, in his words, that to low staffing, that could support a finding. We already went over what the inspector said, that she did not attribute that to low staffing. And again, the instances of deficiencies in this area we're talking about are two instances, excuse me, 2 units in 1 shift, 2 units out of 21 where youth were late by 10 minutes or less, no connection to staffing. And you have 1 instance of outdoor program cancellation on a day that the BSCC deemed insufficient, again, not connected to low staffing, and medical appointments being canceled, again, not connected to low staffing. So at the very minimum on this record, the link isn't there.
This really is, lastly, I just want to make clear, we're arguing over the interpretation, our understanding, and the application. This is,
Okay.
like I said at the beginning, we have great respect for staff, including Mr. McGuire.
Question, this is a December 2024 inspection appeal.
Correct. The window of time we're referring to is that December inspection period. That was a period of time in which they were out of compliance with programs, rec, and
And I
exercise.
simply want to say that because it was Mr. Tyson who referred to something as recent as yesterday or this week that they're now in compliance. And so I really want to assure that we are working on a timeline associated with this appeal, not everything that's happened since the day of that appeal. And so that was somewhat misleading, and I want to clarify that for the members with me at the dais today, because I think that's an important distinguishing factor. I now strongly synthesize this back into a disagreement of a statute by 2 parties with a vested interest in the outcome. I don't know if Ms. Southwell wants to talk. I don't know if that's necessary. I would like both of you to only address that issue. Please don't take me back in the weeds again, because the weeds and the timing of all that is very, very difficult. I'm most interested in the application of this reg associated with this appeal today.
So I'll apologize to you.
You don't need to apologize.
But I do want to reference that Mr. McGuire pointed out use of force, room confinement, and use of mechanical restraints. That also was found after the December inspection. That was found in late December. This inspection deals with early December. So my comments back to him is, if we're going to jump,
Right.
let's
The goal
jump.
before us is this appeal, and that's why I keep trying to raise the altitude. Much of what you showed us in your presentation was applicable, but in many of the conversations, I feel like we got way down a timeline and a rabbit hole that is not applicable to this conversation. So anything, Mr. McGuire, you want to
Well,
heard a fair amount from LA on this?
yeah, and again, I was using, I think I misspoke a little bit because I was trying to illustrate examples of things we would be looking for to connect to staffing, and I gave some of those examples, and Mr. Nelson's correct. There's some that are happening tomorrow in relation to more recent things, and there were other things that were happening back in December. I just wanted to again reread the issue, which was, again, we were connecting programs, recs, and exercise not consistently occurring. Youth continued to be held in room confinement without documentation, held in their locker rooms for excessive periods of time. That youth continued to be late to school, and youth were not getting to medically necessary appointments due to the lack of staffing. It was a small window of time in which we were looking at that inspection. I am hearing council basically argue that, yeah, there were things that were not provided, but it was one or two things, or the lateness to school was not 10 minutes, I think was the example. And again, I would, to the chair's point of lifting the altitude, we are again we're looking at all these things and trying to assess compliance with 1321. And and to the chief's question of tell us the number that we should try to hit, we do not try to do that necessarily. Again, we have asked them, tell us what number you think you're trying to hit. And based on their own information is what we determined that, and we have a disagreement on how we count the bodies of that staffing assessment, but we still stand by our count that they did fall short on those shifts. And again, not every single shift from that 2-week period, but enough shifts where we think it was significant and that we can tie the lack of services and not necessarily non-compliance with all the regulations associated with those, but the lack of services overall, that during that reinspection, it was correctly assessed that they were out of compliance with Section 1321.
Okay, thank you. Council?
So to answer your question, Ms. Penner, there are areas in terms of interpreting the statute that I would say we agree with and areas that we disagree with. In terms of where we agree is that if you're going to find a finding of noncompliance under Section 1321, under programming and what have you, that there be a causal link. I think by now it's clear that causal link between that perceived deficiency and low staffing. And we've explained at length now that link is missing, that the inspector conceded that. I think where the rub is in the area of most disagreement is the BSCC appears to view this in terms of how to quantify the number of staff that need to be present at the facility to be compliant under Section 1321, at least for purposes of the December reinspection. The inspector's view was that you use the staffing assessment, that is the barometer by which you can assess compliance with Section 1321. And we completely disagree with that because for all the reasons explained, the staffing assessment is not an analysis that it sets a floor much higher than Section 1321. On top of that,
So your staffing assessment is aspirational?
I would not say it's aspirational. What I would say is it's tethered, as we've explained earlier, to federal requirements, prior requirements. Some aspects are even higher than the federal requirements. So at a minimum, though, if you're not going to, we will admit that the staffing ratios that Section 1321 sets are in Provision F. We are not saying that simply because those are met, that there can be a scenario where you're out of compliance with A and B. I believe that's what Mr. McGuire is saying. We're not saying that. But to not consider the fact that the county that met and in most often cases greatly exceeded those ratios under subprovision F, to not consider that at all and instead only consider a staffing assessment, which sets a floor much higher than that required by state law, in our view, is a misapplication of the regulation. On top of,
May
oh,
I ask you a question?
yes, please.
Did LA County adopt PREA staffing levels 5 years ago?
The Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors in 2018,
I thought I recalled that.
yes, for the jails and for
Juvenile
the
facility.
juvenile facilities, that they work towards PREA implementation.
Okay. Thank you.
I just had one more point to make. Also, as I mentioned earlier, even if you were to consider staffing assessment as a tool, you have to apply it correctly. It's one thing to use a tool that's made for other purposes, but then apply it correctly. And to exclude small group staff when the plan itself contemplates small group staff being included is misapplying the tool. It's basically creating a new one.
So I really don't want to get in the weeds, but you've driven me to this question. When you talk about small group staffing, you mean a one-on-one. If a young person is on a suicide watch, that's small group staffing, correct?
Yes, that's one of the reasons, yes.
If a young person has been pepper sprayed and they have to be on a watch because of pepper spray, that's small group staffing, correct?
Yes.
Trying to think of other examples. A behavioral health young person has to be watched, it's a one-on-one.
Yes.
Disciplinary individuals have to watch one-on-one. So if you are in that one-on-one here, watching a young person at risk of suicide, or a person with a behavioral health issue, or a person who is being disciplined, or, the pepper spray individual, are those staff available to be torn away and used somewhere else during that process? They are staff that is in use and unavailable to do anything else. Is that accurate?
That's not accurate in the
That is
sense,
accurate? How is that not accurate?
well, this is sort of, and I apologize, but this would be a rabbit hole because there's a whole host of activities, taking a young person to a telephone, going through 2 doors to let in a nurse. There are a whole host of activities in which we're counting the person because they have availability in case of an emergency or something happens. They're still counted. They are part of who's available to perform supervision. During the period of their shift, they're going to be given assignments. If they have to write a report, we could say they're not available during the period they're writing the report, but in reality, if they're in the building, they're there to provide direct supervision. They should be counted. Adjustments have to be made by the watch commander.
I'm going to respectfully disagree with some of because you cited some individuals, I cited others, and I see that differently, but my experience is old and haggard. I have been out of the trenches as a chief for 12 years now. So I apologize. Being dominant again, do my partners up here have anything they'd like to say?
Okay, I'll try not to be dominating this conversation, but
Right.
I just want to preface this with a couple things. First of all, thank you for the 3 of you for being here. I think I'm empathetic with the 3 of you because I think you have 3 different. This is just some of my opinion. I think you have 3 different paths you're trying to cover as a team, and I can relate most with our chief because I do run my own facility, and so I appreciate being on this panel because I appreciate the challenges of what that is. And I appreciate what you're trying to do and what your purpose here. I believe what your purpose here is, which is what mine would be, which is to make sure that my staff feel supported and that we know we're trying to do the right thing. And I believe I have an idea of you serving for us, it's a CAO, but I think for you, it's a CEO. And then clearly, you probably have the heaviest lift of the 3. So I appreciate the 3 of you for being here. And I actually appreciate the in-person dialogue because sometimes a written word is a little difficult to digest, and I have reviewed some of your documents. And so seeing you in person is refreshing to me because I get a lot more context of what you're saying. So I say all that and I do have a couple concerns. I think that I feel that we're all trying to do the same thing, right? The staff here at the BSCC, and I will just single you out, Chief, because I didn't have a lot of exposure to probation chiefs in my city policing career, but since I've been with the sheriff's office and since I've been the sheriff, clearly I have a close working relationship with our probation chiefs and our probation staff. I honestly believe that they want what's best for the kids. I really, truly believe that. I believe that our chiefs do, and the vast majority of our staff do. And so I'm gonna submit that that's absolutely where your heart is, or else you wouldn't be in this profession. Without knowing a lot about your background, that's just what I'm going to surmise. I do know, though, as being part of the state sheriffs, we do struggle with local control versus the state telling me what to do. And I've heard, I think, between the three of you, you argue both sides of the same point. You're saying, tell me exactly how many people I need, and then you're telling me, don't tell me how to deploy them. I know how to deploy them because I can use them for 5 different things at once. I understand that because I'm having to do the same thing in my facility. And so the way I look at it as a sheriff, in the way that I interact with the BSCC and our inspectors is like, I'm looking to use that as fodder to go to my county and demand that they give me what I need to make sure that my facilities run correctly, and they don't. And that's where I want to empathize with you as a chief, because I don't know what level that's happening for you or what support you're being given, but I'm sure you enjoy being employed and you want to continue in that capacity. So I think we walk that fine line. Being elected is a little bit different. Trust me, it's a different deal. So what I think, just from my limited time here on BSCC, is what I see our staff trying to do, at least in my facility and the stuff that I've seen, is they do try to give you a lot of grace. And to steal your quote of, I'm not that smart, but I have common sense, I feel I'm the same way. I'm going to sit here and tell you, since I've been here, I don't think Los Padrinos is doing it correctly all the time. That's my common sense talking. And if we want to get into a technicality and try to get off on something because of a line wasn't drawn correctly on a document, I think we're missing the point. And so I believe that this is the same way that I would talk to my own staff when they're going through issues or they're looking at maybe underperforming. When you're talking about people missing assignments, you made the comment that there's inappropriate paperwork. I'm not saying it's in the purview of exactly what this appeal is, but falsified documents is not inappropriate paperwork. And I've made that statement to the media. I've made that statement about Los Padrinos. I'm not going to pretend to tell you what you should and shouldn't do with your staff as far as discipline. I expect that you are doing the right thing. But in our profession, you lie, you die. You falsify a document, you should never set foot in that facility again. That's the biggest issue that I have. If that's what you're talking about, the inappropriate paperwork, I have a really strong opinion about that, because falsifying a log is not forgetting to check a box. And so some of that is what I really struggle with when it comes to these kids, is, are we doing the right thing? And if we're not, are we trying to BS our way through it? That, and I'm just being straightforward with all of you. Like, that's how I feel about it. So with that, I think for me, the inspectors try to give us some grace. If you're missing these benchmarks, they're saying you either don't care. This is polar, this is a black and white thing. You either don't care or you can't do it because of something. You either are blowing off this regulation or you're not getting the support you need from the county. You don't have enough people to do it. And I think that when we lean towards looking at it, that it's a staffing issue, that's not an issue of character. That's not an issue of culture. That's an issue of, do you have the tools? Is the county providing you with the tools that you need to do your job efficiently? Is it providing you with enough pay to get qualified and good people in there that have the right heart to do the job? Are you being supported to do what you need to do to serve these kids? That's the way I look at it as a sheriff. And I want to make sure that I'm battling not just for the kids, but fulfilling my function on this board and battling for you to make sure that you have the ammo that you need to make sure that you can do your job correctly. I don't know that that's happening. I don't know that just because we're saying, and I'm even looking at, I'm sorry, I'm a talker, but I'm looking at H1 parens E, that says personnel with primary responsibility for other duties such as, and it gives you some things as, but if people have responsibility for other duties, shall not be classified as youth supervision staff positions. I think that when you get into it and you say, well, we had 48, therefore we're compliant, but the inspector's there and they know that of those 48, some of them have primary responsibility outside of this. We have to listen to our staff on that because it's a whole picture. It's not just a number on a page. We can tell you that as long as you have 60 people in the facility, you're good, but if all 60 are in the break room, that's no good. So I think that I understand what you're saying because I want that number too, Chief. Like I want the state to say, you have to have this many people so I can go to the board and say, I demand this many people. And I get the same thing. We're not going to tell you that exact number. It's you operationally telling us what you need, and then we figure out a way to support that. So I'm looking at that, just so you know, I'm looking at that, that parens E section when we parse all this out. I also, one of the things in the written word from council, I felt that there was a little bit of splitting hairs over the inspections. I like things to be very clear and straightforward. I don't read anywhere, this is a question that I just had for you. It didn't really come up in your presentation, but is it the county's position still under Welfare and Institutions 209 that the statute, the way I read it, is that your assertion is that we can only do a biennial inspection? Is that still the county's assertion? I don't read the statute that way. I don't think it says that, but that's just, I'm a dumb cop.
Happy to answer that question. That is our position. That's for purposes of the issue we focused on today,
Right.
which is the reinspection findings. That's not pertinent to that. There is a separate issue that we've challenged as to whether the BSCC has authority to conduct more than a biannual inspection. We think it does not. BSCC disagrees, and that's an issue that is brief, but that we haven't focused on for purposes of today's
Yeah,
presentation.
I know the presentation, but it is in the documentation
It
that was
is, that's
submitted.
correct.
It is in what I have to review. So I just wanted to make sure I had that. I think I'm good.
Thank you.
I'll be brief. I really appreciate you all coming up here and showing up. I told you all earlier, I was surprised to see you. I thought that you wouldn't be here in person, so thank you. And then I also saw, I think it was this week that you submitted a plan to the Board of Supervisors. I think that was this week. You submitted something and I was really excited to see that. I haven't really dug into it, but I was excited to see that. And I know as probation, you all are trying to do the right thing. But as the non-law enforcement person here and person who does not come from that background, I have not had had the experience. I was on the other side of that. And so but I do know a few things by going inside and visiting the youth and visiting folks that are incarcerated and also having been in that situation myself. And that is that the one-on-one staff cannot leave who they're supporting or who they're supposed to be attached to. And I've been there many times and talked to the staff. So that part. And then also I just feel like it's a lot of, sort of semantics today about saying whether the youth hasn't been to school, they were not able to go to school, they weren't making their medical appointments. And it's just, I know, I hear you, because I'm kind of the same way. Like, I want a number, like I want something concrete. I love following the rules. Give me the rule, I'll follow it. Like, I love that. However, I think that this is the situation where the regulation is that the youth are to receive these services, and when they're not, the purpose of the BSCC is to dig in there and to look and to see what's going on. So, yeah, but thank you.
If I could just respond to Sheriff Taylor and Board Member Kumi, I appreciate your comments. Don't disagree with any of it. I just want to clarify and be very clear. This is the only opportunity we have. And so it is not by design of Los Angeles County to say an appeal is what's desired. We would rather have a partnership in which the board had more flexibility in how it would respond to a challenge of this magnitude. We are open to that. We are flexible. It has been our understanding that the board is limited by the regulations and the term of options, but we would invite and would love to look at other options to ultimately become compliant. I hope you've heard from us. That is all we want and more in terms of providing adequate care. And just a point of clarification on the one-on-one, because I don't want to leave here with folks thinking that I'm saying, what I'm referring to is how you begin a shift. And so I can't anticipate, for example, how many of those are going to occur. So you have to pivot as things occur and then bring in more staff. That's the movement that I think you see within the facility, but I don't want you to think that I'm saying
Oh,
those are counted. Yeah, I just didn't
took
want.
an opportunity to
yeah.
defer
Yeah,
to win that little point. Let me
Yeah.
say this. We're looking for areas of agreement here. I think the BSCC is saying, conceding, saying your staff. What I think we fall from grace with each other is the deployment of that staff. And I'm using a colloquialism to discuss how you deploy staff in a facility as large as Los Padrinos. And there's a critical incident getting from one end to the other. I can't imagine how long that takes you to get there. With that said, we assert in these papers that young people's needs aren't being met based on the number of staff you have on site. And without looking at a chart, without looking at, all of the graphs you put up, that I don't know a human that could actually read those from this. And I did try to review them on my iPad and was not wholly successful. We're really, my simplification of the issue, having a legal argument here. I mean, for you, counsel, to assert we can't inspect you more than once a year, we find it so wholeheartedly disagree with that. We think we have an obligation to do unannounced inspections, to come in and take a look as we deem necessary. And so we're just a long way apart on the legal issue. So it's going to come down to a finding based on that. Without saying LA doesn't care, LA isn't doing the right thing, or the BSCC is being arbitrary, capricious, and heavy-handed. I don't think that's where we're at today. I'm going to end with that, and I'm going to open it to public comment, if I may. Do we have any public comment? And let me say, we're going to limit that to 1 minute. If we have a number, I don't know where we're at right now.
Right now, we have two. We're going to start with comments on Zoom.
I think I can afford 2 minutes for that. So yeah, I thought we might have 102. Thank you. So let me say we're going to close the queue in 2 minutes. And anyone in the room that would like to comment, I don't know if we have the cards available. There we go. We got it. Okay. Yeah, let's let you go in the room first. We never do that. Way to change us up here.
Came all the way from Hollister.
There you go, all the way from Hollister.
Good afternoon, Israel Salazar Villa, co-convener of the California Alliance for Youth and Community Justice. This has been interesting and very, very frustrating, especially when we have a law enforcement agency or law enforcement officers who have held me accountable and many of my peers, and who currently are responsible for the care of our young folks. And there's been so much going on, I don't even have to repeat everything that's been in the news, indictments, class actions. And we will never forget young Brian Diaz, who I feel y'all extremely failed. And I'm wondering, like, what happens when law enforcement is not acknowledging the law, or a state board that is part of the administration tasked with enforcing the minimum standards? It's not a good look, especially again, when you currently, what happens when a young person violates the law, breaks a rule at school, violates a condition of probation, or violates an infraction within your facility? We're held accountable, they're held accountable. You go to court, you catch time, you continue to give endless probation, you add more probation, you add more probation, you add more probation. It's accountability, and y'all are very strong, at least when it comes to folks like me and us and the young folks in your quote unquote care. I would like to see these folks held accountable the way our Attorney General hold those officers who were indicted accountable for atrocious behaviors. And thank y'all, the BSCC. I know oftentimes I come up here and shoot arrows at you, and we have interesting relations, but on this one, we're definitely aligned, and I hope that you hold the line without prejudice and set the example. And I heard one of the gentlemen say something about other counties. You know, I mean, this is a president here, and it hasn't been looking good, but please hold them accountable, hold that line. It's pretty sad, you know. I first got busted when I was 12. This is the early 90s. And in the early 90s, they were letting us fight, you know, there were peppers, all the same things is happening. I'm glad that it's been happening for generations. It's now, the world knows, you know. And Chief, you know, I know you got a tough job, but I really want to urge and implore you to please listen to the young voices who are currently incarcerated. You have a youth advisory board at Camp Kilpatrick composed of young people who are in those living conditions right now. You have a lot of family members, all of their relatives, bro. You have so many CBOs, especially in Los Angeles, wanting to help. You have credible messengers who y'all have been delaying the clearance of for months, who want to go in there and help, who can help all these staffing ratios and concerns and things like that. Please, that master plan so far just looks like very much yours, and I understand you're tasked with the department and its well-being. And do they got what they need? They got a $1.4 billion budget, brother. They definitely got what you need. There is no excuse for what has been happening for years now. And they got to be held accountable. And please listen to the community. Please let us help. I know you need help. We want to help. These are our kids. We care about our kids, and I'm sure you all do too. Let's do it. Let's work together. That closing Kilpatrick is not it. But let's talk about it. Please don't finalize it without the community. Please. Thank
And
you.
You know, we all know you, you're famous, but you did not state your name for the record.
Israel Villa.
How did I not know that? Oh, thank you for doing that.
Are there any more commenters in the room? We'll move to Zoom. Tally, I'm going to allow you to talk so you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Greeting Madam Penner and BSCC board members. LA probation under the leadership of Vieira Rosa is a failure. He has been robbing Peter to pay Paul for the last 2 years, and prior to him, 5 years with the other chief, by deploying DPO2s to do the job. Right now, we're in a crisis situation where we do not have enough staff to even supervise those that the judge released to the community, those juveniles that need referrals, that need the help from the CBOs. We don't have the resources because we're all at juvenile hall. And basically all the numbers that I'm seeing is padded numbers. My thing, I would ask them, how many of those staff are DPO2s who should be in the field, assessing the field and keeping the community safe? That's probably one of the questions you should ask those before you in probation. Other than that, I'm in agreement that the facility should be closed down. It's not doing any good to the youth that there. It's not doing any good to the staff that there. It's a lot of violence still, youth on youth and youth on staff. And in a minute, there will be a fatality. And I hate to say that. Brian Diaz already lost his life. I don't want to see anyone else lose their life behind this. Thank you.
Thank you.
James Martinez, you can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, board. Are you able to hear me now as I speak?
Yes.
Good afternoon, board. My name is James Martinez. I'm a leadership and programs coordinator with Milpa. I would definitely like to uplift the importance of really addressing the inadequacies of Los Padrinos and how it has continuously failed disproportionately. And the time is now to acknowledge the failures and to bring about what's needed to address the inadequacies that continue to permeate within this facility. As it's been seen, the gladiator fights that were being set up is very concerning at the fact that you have individuals that have taken a sworn oath to protect the safety and the well-being of those that are housed in the institution, and to consider that these individuals are basically at the helm of setting up fights is very concerning and something that needs to be addressed accordingly, sufficiently, and effectively. The opportunities now for address this unfortunate matter, and if we do not take the necessary steps to address this accordingly, then what we're going to see is a continuous deficiencies that not only exist there, but exist in other places. But I think now's the opportunity for us to really provide a lens of perspective on what's happening and what seems to be the root causes and the root issues. As we all know, there are derivatives, there are causes, but it is important for us to look at the root causes and to ensure that we address this in a timely fashion. I strongly encourage this board to consider the inadequacies, not only on the ratios, on the so-called numbers, but in the ineffectiveness of Los Padrinos. On that note, thank you very much for giving me the time here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Armando Gutierrez, you can speak.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I don't have a prepared statement, so it's just my honest talk from the heart. My name is Armando Gutierrez, for the record. You misspelled my name there. I was a teacher at Central, then we went to Silmar, then it was mission accomplished when Mr. Vieira Rosa brought us back to LP. And I was there until recently because that place is so toxic and the education is substandard. In education, we have the golden rule that says treat them like you would want your own children treated. I don't think anyone would, on the outside, would want their kids to have that curriculum. A loser principal threw away all the textbooks a couple years ago. This was all in tandem with probation. I remember a graduation after COVID where I tried to speak to Mr. Nieto and Father Boyle about the racial tension, the prison politics that were permeating throughout the facility. And Mr. Nieto's response was, oh, we have staff with racial issues as well. That tells you everything you need to know about Los Padrinos. The girls should go to Kirby and the Kilpatrick should stay boys. But Mr. Vieira Rosa, you're clueless. You think you want to stay in bed with the BSCC. You took on this job for the 300K, but you don't even know how to deal with small issues. There should be a unit at LP for first-time offenders where you allocate all your resources so all those kids don't come back. But all your leadership has ignored all my suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have Noeli. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Noe Loesa. I just want to say this conversation is played out. Every time I come to a BSCC meeting, it is the same topic. And it's frustrating to see that they get extensions. Again, they're out of compliance. They get another extension out of compliance. It's at what point is enough enough? Right? I think we've reached that point. I've reached that point. And I just want to say this is not a job. This is not solely a job. I understand that Los Padrinos is, looking out for their employees and whatnot, but these are people's lives at stake. There are people in their custody in those facilities, and not only other people, their children. So I understand the need to look out for staff and whatnot, but at the end of the day, these children live there, they sleep there, they eat there. that is where they're staying for the next few months to years. And so I think the priority really needs to shift to what is going on with the youth. Are the youth okay? And really get comments from the youth, because we can hear about staff, but what about the youth? So I really urge the conversation to shift as to what is best for the youth. And clearly, this is not what's best for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for public comment.
Thank you very much. Back to the board. Any other questions or comments?
I just want to again thank the three of you for being here in person. It's important. I know it's not easy, but thank you, all three of you.
I echo that. Thank you so much for coming up and for being here and being part of this discussion and for caring. And thank you.
And I would echo that. I thank both parties for their presentation today, their professionalism, and I would like to narrow the next part of this conversation specifically to the appeal and the response to the appeal. Sometimes the public misconstrues this as though we are at a different point in proceedings, and in this process, we are simply making a finding on an appeal that was presented by Los Angeles County and responded to by the Board of State and Community Corrections. There was a denial of the appeal by Executive Director McGuire, and this body that you see before you today was convened, the three of us, to make a decision on the appeal of the appeal, I guess is really how it's set forth. I am ready to make a motion. Before I do that, I would simply like to say that we disagree on many things in terms of what was tossed back and forth from one appeal to the other. And the one thing I don't disagree on is people caring, people in this for the right reasons, people taking time and effort and preparation to come here today and do that. But with all that said, I feel strongly, I continue to support the decision of Executive Director McGuire, and I think that this is a very legal issue that we are disputing, and I think that he is on sound ground with his denial of the appeal, and I make that a motion to this body that we deny the appeal Los Angeles County. I need, well, there's only three of us, so it's kind of weak. With that said, I'll tell you what, without knowing what everybody's going to do, I would ask you to take the roll.
Mayor Penner,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
Kumpion,
Aye.
Madam Chair, the motion carries.
Thank you very much. And then we will head into tomorrow. Thank you for your time in all sincerity.